President Joe Biden urged Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to agree to a 3-day pause in the fighting against Hamas in order to allow for progress in releasing some of the hostages held by Hamas in Gaza on a call Monday, according to U.S. and Israeli officials. Now, that official told Axios that Netanyahu is hesitant because he does not trust Hamas's intentions and that Hamas previously attacked a group of Israeli soldiers, kidnapping one and killing several during a, quote, humanitarian pause back in 2014.
Meanwhile, Secretary of State Antony Blinken said Israel should not reoccupy Gaza after Netanyahu said Israel would assume responsibility for Gaza's security indefinitely. Let's watch.
The only way to ensure that this crisis never happens again is to begin setting the conditions for durable peace and security and to frame our diplomatic efforts now with that in mind. The United States believes key elements should include no forcible displacement of Palestinians from Gaza. Not now, not after the war. No use of Gaza as a platform for terrorism or other violent attacks. No reoccupation of Gaza after the conflict ends. No attempt to blockade or besiege Gaza. No reduction in the territory of Gaza.
This comes after Biden, his administration announced $320 million in weapons transfer to the IDF this week. The Intercept's Ken Klippenstein makes the case that while the United States' weapon assistance to Ukraine is quite transparent, the weapons transfers to Israel are shrouded in secrecy. He writes that the Biden administration has released a 3-page list of weapons provided to Ukraine, but only released a sentence of information regarding weapons sent to Israel.
CNN's Jake Tapper had this to say on the hostages still being held by Hamas in Gaza.
Israel sees the parades and the rallies for the ceasefire, and they see no parades and no rallies for the return of the hostages or the removal of Hamas.
Yeah, which should we do first? For one, let's say the Blinken quote is interesting for what it does and what it doesn't say. It continues the posture the United States has been taking to Israel, where they say, well, we would like for them to follow international law. Of course, they have the right to defend themselves, but within these bounds, without acknowledging the ways that Israel has already crossed those bounds, and without acknowledging that it has the power to do more than urge Israel to do X, Y, and Z if it were willing to potentially cut off military and monetary aid that has been not just regular 3.8 million billion every year, but now in excess post this crisis.
Yeah, it should be obvious at this point that the U.S., the Biden administration, and Netanyahu have actually completely different policy objectives or ideas about what's going to happen down the line. Netanyahu sounds like he very explicitly wants to occupy Gaza and have Israel become responsible for the security of the Palestinian people there. Blinken is saying the Biden administration is utterly opposed to that. Does that mean, if there's not a meeting of the minds on this, does that mean we continue to fund them anyway? I mean, what are we doing? Why don't we get our way when we give money to people? I think that's a question that a lot of American taxpayers who so generously pay for this might be asking. Why is it no strings attached, unconditional support to other countries' defenses and, foreign policy ideas? We're on the hook for it, and then they don't do what we want.
Yeah, and there's
frustrating.
Been a number of pieces of evidence that Palestinians and advocates for Palestinians have been looking to, which have indicated that this has been Israel's plan for a very long time, right? Not just Netanyahu saying that there needs to be this permanent occupation, but the choice to, for example, bomb a number of hospitals, bomb critical infrastructure, bomb every university in Gaza has now been destroyed. So any students who are thinking we're going to continue our education, we're going to be able to come back and live lives, these are efforts or actions, I should say, which seem to be making it impossible for folks, perhaps designed to make it impossible for folks to see a long-term future in Gaza after this. We've talked about how 40% of all of the housing stock, this was now a couple of weeks ago, who knows what the statistic is now, had been destroyed. So all of that is happening. We had the leaked security intel document, which showed that one of 3 plans, and the ones that was considered to be most viable, was driving all of the Palestinians of Gaza out into Egypt, permanently setting up a tent refugee city for them there to live in perpetuity and reoccupying Gaza. All that being on the table, it does feel kind of empty for Blinken to be saying, yeah, well, they shouldn't do that. At the same time, it is interesting to hear that in his list of conditions for, quote, durable peace includes an end to the blockade, which is this interesting recognition that we haven't had as vociferously, at least post October 7th, that the conditions that preceded the conflict in the first place was the 17-year blockade and occupation of Gaza.
Yeah, I think we need to be a little bit more clear-eyed about what is possible for us to have an influence over Israel. Israel is going to do what it's going to do. It is clearly going to continue bombing Gaza until it is satisfied that Hamas is eliminated, and then sounds like it's going to occupy Gaza so this never happens again. And I think the state of Israel is going to do that no matter, irrespective of what U.S. Policymakers want. And so really, from my standpoint, the choice just becomes, well, are we going to continue to pay for this, even if they're getting involved in a much larger... They have an appetite for a larger conflict. They were attacked. They feel very justified in continuing to reduce Gaza to rubble in their pursuit of Hamas. And you know what? That's fine, but we don't have to be on the hook for it. That's what I would prefer if Biden would come to grips with.
So I disagree with the idea that Israel's going to do what it wants to do as long as it wants to do it. For example, we've had reporting in the last couple of weeks that part of why there was this rush to get this aid package out the door is that Israel was running out of bombs for its missile defense system. In a world where the onslaught of Hamas bombs at Israel actually strike targets instead of being exploded by this Iron Dome system, is that a world in which Israel is frankly more likely to come to the negotiating table, more likely to say the cost benefit of me continuing this occupation and giving people cause to want to resist and fight back and free themselves in this way is just too high, and that we do actually have to come to a two-state solution because the current status quo is just too costly for us. And not to mention the fact that just in the last couple of days, there was an instance also where a bomb from Israel's missile defense system functioned inappropriately and ended up hitting a target in Israel. So it is not invulnerable, and it becomes much more vulnerable without the U.S.'s support, which is part of why, from a humanitarian perspective, people have been asking whether U.S. aid to Israel is in fact having the effect of prolonging the conflict and prolonging the occupation and apartheid conditions that Palestinians have been living in.
Well, look, I'm fine. I'm keen to find out. I wouldn't give this aid for free. If they want to, continue this war and pay for it themselves, they want to buy weapons like everyone else. That's fine by me. They just don't need charity to do it. And if that gives them, maybe that's giving them a blank check, and will have some kind of limiting effect on how they conduct this. I suspect it won't. I suspect at this point they are committed to wiping out Hamas and feel that they cannot safely live next to such an organization.
Do you think it's possible, given what we've seen 20 years in Afghanistan, given what we've seen in 20 plus years of a war on terror, that it is possible to wipe out a terrorist group, especially when their objectives, the thing that they say that they're fighting against, persists?
We very much limited the, without totally getting rid of, we put a serious dent in ISIS when we put our minds to it. So I suspect they can do the same thing. I mean, they're killing tons of people affiliated with ISIS, with Hamas.
Well, they're not really. They have their own estimates say about 400 to 500, as I understand it, compared to over 10,000 civilians that have been killed. I wouldn't necessarily call that an ethical ratio per se, but the bigger point that I'm making is that I think with every bomb that they drop, they create more young Palestinians who are going to want to do whatever they can do, including resistance within a legal international law framework that does mean violence for Israelis, even if it is legal, to in their occupation and in their subjugation. And so this seems like a futile error. This is not a conflict that is going to be resolved when Palestinians are just re-oppressed. That might resolve it for Israelis, but I think the mismatch, the failure to meet of the minds here is that if you really want there to be peace in the region, you have to provide substantive justice for the people of Palestine. I did want to ask you what you made of that Jake Tapper framing at the end there. There do seem to be quite a few protests in support of the Palestinian cause. Of course, over the weekend, 300,000 in D.C. alone took to the streets. And you haven't seen very much in the way of protests for Israel. Why do you think that is?
I don't know. Why do you think that is?
I think that that's where the public support lies. And I also think
I mean,
that
it's clearly not. I mean, if you ask the public if they're more sympathetic to the Israelis or to Hamas, it's very clear where public sentiment is.
And if you ask the public if they support a ceasefire, it's very clear that 66% do. And if you ask the public, do you think that I should have to open my computer every day and look at the inside of a baby's skull that has been blown apart by an IDF missile, I think they would probably also agree that that's
now
not something
you're
they
using
do.
Dead babies cynically in this sort of way.
I'm not using.
Oh my God. Okay.
I'm not using dead babies cynically. There are over 4,000 Palestinian children who, in fact, have been killed, whose names were written on a document so long it had to be carried over the heads of multiple people at the event, the parade, the protest in D.C. last weekend. I think there are very principled reasons to object to those murders of all of those people, men, women, and children. And I think that that's a very different thing than Joe Biden lying about a story about 40 decapitated babies, which his team had to retract, and which the IDF wouldn't even confirm existed.
It's disgusting to cast aspersions on the horrific crimes committed by Hamas that this is a response to.
You can keep saying that that's what I'm doing. It's not what I'm doing.
Well, it is what you're doing. And
do you think that Israel has the right to kill 4,000 children the way it's done over the last 4 weeks?
I think any state on earth would respond to a terrorist attack by trying to hunt down the terrorists in exactly this manner.
In exactly this manner, in violation of international law, dropping white phosphorus.
The terrorists are violating international law and are hiding in hospitals and schools and under them and are making it very difficult to be killed. So of course they want a ceasefire that they violated in the first place.
Oh, let's talk about the ceasefire.
If I punch you in the face and then they say, no, ceasefire. We don't punch each other anymore.
That's a really good point. Yeah, you think that you should be able to punch me in the face and then I should be able to kill you, your family, and everybody you love. I disagree with that as well. But let's talk about the ceasefire because that is a really important part of this. It's
not going to happen. It's not what the state of Israel wants, and it's not actually what Hamas wants. They can say it's what they want, but they want to wipe Israel off the map. So it doesn't matter if we want to say you're projecting like leftist values onto the conflict that neither side in it wants. Hamas wants war, and so they're getting war.
If I could just talk about a couple of facts here, Robby. What's really interesting is how much...
They wanted to murder people, drag them from their homes, shoot them at bus stops, kill them at music festivals, hold them hostage, and now they are suffering the consequences from that.
I'd like to point out again that I'm repeatedly accused of interrupting on this show and not giving you an opportunity to speak.
Go ahead.
Some facts that I'd just like to get out on the table quickly before we wrap here is that this is repeatedly being framed as a ceasefire won't work because you can't expect Hamas to hold up its end of the bargain. It's a bad deal. There's no point in even going down this road. Historically, though, that has not been what the case was. For example, one notable example of a long ceasefire that held was back in 2008, where for approximately 4 months, a ceasefire was successfully negotiated and kept. And it was very interestingly Israel that broke that ceasefire in the cover of media attention and international attention being focused on the 2008 election and Barack Obama's victory. And they very cynically used the world attention being elsewhere to bomb Palestine, bomb Gaza, and to end the ceasefire. So I do think it is really irresponsible for journalists to continue to report this idea that ceasefires are only broken by Hamas. Hamas is like constitutionally unable, physiognomically, the people are so dastardly, the people are so irrational that they are unable to hold a ceasefire without making those same charges at Israel, who has demonstrably done the same.
They just launched an attack. Hamas just did that. They had a state of ceasefire, and they attacked. And so they're reaping what they sow. There are consequences for that kind of thing.
I think you've made it really clear, and I don't think you need to keep emphasizing the point that you believe that Israel, that if you are attacked, you can respond in any way, no matter how disproportionate, to whatever end. I strongly disagree with that position, but I don't think that you need to keep reiterating it to make it clear. I think the audience knows that's where you stand. I personally find that to be a morally abominable position, but I respect your right to say that and to believe it, but you're not going to convince me, so I don't know how much we need to keep doing that back and forth.
All right, well, you're not going to convince me that Hamas's actions are justified and in keeping with some kind of liberatory struggle that is perfectly fine.
I'm not trying to convince you of anything. I'm trying to talk to an audience about what the terms of a potential actual peace in the region actually are.
Neither side wants peace.
No, I think that's not true. I think that Benjamin Netanyahu has repeatedly, both through his actions and his words, said that he doesn't want peace because peace
and Hamas
actually means
has demonstrated through its actions that it doesn't want peace, and so it wanted war and it's getting war.
Because peace means a two-state solution and or an end to a...
I would love a two-state solution.
Robby.
I would support a two-state solution, but no one, they don't want it.
You've never seen the end of a sentence that you wanted to hear.
What does that mean?
You just interrupted me like 4 times in the middle of one sentence.
You interrupt me plenty. We interrupt each other. We talk.
All right.
Go ahead.
I think you
You have
guys
more to
get
say.
my point, what I'm trying to say here, so we can go ahead and wrap this segment. Stick around. We're rising after this.